3 months ago, I was living in a $4.2 million house in California with my wife and kids. Today, I'm holding a letter that reveals my entire life has been a lie, and the woman who destroyed me might have saved my life without knowing it. My name is Fletcher Morrison, and I'm 47 years old. Until recently, I was a commercial insurance adjuster in Pasadena, the kind of guy who spent his days evaluating other people's disasters and helping them rebuild. I had what everyone would call the American dream. A beautiful wife named Cordelia, who I'd been married to for 18 years. Twin kids, Quinlan and Brenna, both 16 and 14, smart as whips, and the center of my universe. We lived in this gorgeous house up in the hills, with a view of the entire city spread out below us like a glittering carpet. I thought I knew exactly who I was. Fletcher Morrison, son of Winifred Morrison, a quiet librarian who raised me alone after my father died in a car accident when I was 12. My dad was supposedly just a regular guy, worked construction, died too young, and left my mom to figure out how to raise a son on a librarian's salary. We didn't have much growing up in Ohio, but Mom always made sure I had what I needed. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who kept photo albums organized by year, who made sure I ate my vegetables and did my homework. Cordelia was my high school sweetheart. We met when I was 17 and she was 16, fell in love the way teenagers do, with everything we had. She was ambitious, beautiful, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and command attention without trying. She went into real estate after college and was damn good at it. We built this life together, brick by brick, year by year. The kids came along. We moved to California for better opportunities, bought the dream house, enrolled Quinlan and Brenna in private schools. Quinlan was our star athlete, 6'2", and built like his grandfather apparently was, though I never really knew my dad well enough to say for sure. He played varsity basketball, had colleges already scouting him as a sophomore. Brenna was the artist in the family, just like my mother had been in her quiet way. She could draw anything, had this way of seeing the world that made you stop and really look at things differently. For 47 years, this was my story. This was who I was. Fletcher Morrison, family man, insurance adjuster, former Ohio kid who made good in California. I had no reason to question any of it. Then everything started falling apart. It began about 18 months ago with small things. Cordelia would get phone calls and step outside to take them. She'd come home from work later and later, claiming new clients, bigger deals. She started looking at me differently, like I was a stranger she was trying to figure out. The warmth we'd shared for nearly 2 decades just started cooling, degree by degree, until I felt like I was living with someone who barely tolerated my presence. The kids noticed it too. Quinlan would ask me why Mom seemed angry all the time. Brenna started spending more time in her room, drawing darker pictures, portraits of families that looked broken even when they were smiling. I kept thinking it was a phase, maybe early midlife stuff, maybe work stress. I tried talking to Cordelia, tried planning date nights, tried everything I could think of to reconnect with the woman I'd loved since I was a teenager. Nothing worked. If anything, my efforts seemed to make her more distant, more hostile. Then came the divorce papers. Not just divorce papers, but a full-scale attack on everything I thought I knew about myself. According to Cordelia's lawyer, I was a gambling addict who'd been hiding massive debts. I was financially irresponsible, possibly dangerous, certainly unfit to have custody of our children. They had bank statements showing transactions I'd never made, casino receipts with my signature that I'd never signed, witness statements from people claiming I'd borrowed money and never paid them back. None of it was true, not a single word. But somehow, they had documentation for all of it. The courtroom was a nightmare. I sat there watching my entire life get dismantled by lawyers who spoke about me like I was some kind of criminal. My own wife, the mother of my children, the woman I'd shared a bed with for 18 years, wouldn't even look at me. When the judge awarded Cordelia everything, the house, primary custody, even my business assets, I felt something break inside my chest. But the worst part came afterward, outside the courthouse. Cordelia walked up to me with this smile I'd never seen before, cold and satisfied. She leaned in close and whispered, "You'll never see Quinlan and Brenna again. I'm moving them to Portland next month, and you don't have the money to fight me anymore." That's when I knew this wasn't just a marriage falling apart. This was something else entirely, something calculated and cruel that I couldn't understand. Within 6 weeks, I'd lost my house, my kids, and even my insurance license because of the fabricated financial misconduct allegations. I had nowhere to go except back to Ohio, to my mother's house that had been sitting empty since she died 2 years ago. So I loaded what was left of my life into the back of my Honda Civic and drove 1,200 miles to a place I hadn't lived since I was 18 years old. That's where this story really begins. The drive from California to Ohio took me 3 days, and every mile felt like I was traveling backward through time. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my mother's house on Maple Street in Akron, I felt like a ghost returning to haunt his own past. The house looked exactly the same as it had at Mom's funeral 2 years earlier. Small, neat, the kind of 1960s ranch home that defined middle-class America back when that actually meant something. White siding, black shutters, a front porch just big enough for 2 chairs, and a small table where my mother used to sit every evening with her tea and whatever book she was reading from the library. I sat in the car for a long time before I could bring myself to go inside. This was supposed to be temporary, just a place to regroup while I figured out how to get my life back. But sitting there looking at that modest little house, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd fallen. 3 months ago, I could see downtown Los Angeles from my bedroom window. Now, I was looking at Mrs. Patterson's garden gnomes across the street. My mother, Winifred Morrison, had lived in this house for 35 years. She bought it when I was 12, right after my father died, using his life insurance money and what little savings they'd managed to scrape together. It was the kind of purchase that represented hope more than logic. A single mother with a librarian's salary taking on a mortgage because she believed her son deserved a backyard and his own room. Mom was the most quietly strong person I'd ever known. She never remarried after Dad died, never even dated as far as I could tell. She threw herself into raising me and her work at the downtown branch of the Akron Public Library. Every morning, she'd make me breakfast and pack my lunch, then walk the 6 blocks to work, carrying her own lunch in a brown paper bag. Every evening, she'd come home with a stack of books under her arm, some for work, some for pleasure, some because she thought I might like them. She had this way of making our small life feel rich and full. We didn't have money for fancy vacations, so she'd create adventures in our own backyard. We'd set up the tent and camp out under the stars, and she'd tell me stories about constellations while we shared a thermos of hot chocolate. When I got interested in model airplanes, she worked extra hours at the library to buy me kits, then sat with me at the kitchen table helping me paint the tiny details, even though her eyes weren't great. What I remember most about my mother was how she seemed to have this quiet certainty about everything. She always knew exactly how much money we had, exactly when bills needed to be paid, exactly what I needed before I knew I needed it. For a woman who'd been widowed young and left to raise a child alone, she never seemed worried or overwhelmed. She just handled whatever needed handling with this calm competence that made me feel safe in a way I didn't fully appreciate until I became a parent myself. The strange thing was we always seemed to have just enough money. Never plenty, but never the kind of desperate shortage you'd expect from a single mother's librarian salary. When I needed school clothes, there was money for school clothes. When the car broke down, she had it fixed. When I wanted to go to college, she somehow made that happen too, though she never explained exactly how she'd managed to save enough. I asked her about it once, when I was in my 20s, newly married to Cordelia, and starting to understand how expensive life could be. "Mom, how did you do it? How did you manage to give me everything I needed on what the library paid you?" She just smiled that quiet smile of hers and said, "You find a way when someone you love depends on you. That's what parents do." Now, unlocking the front door and stepping into her house for the first time since the funeral, I could smell her presence everywhere. That mixture of lavender soap and old books that had always meant home to me. The furniture was exactly where she'd left it. Her reading glasses still sat on the end table next to her favorite chair. The last book she'd been reading, a mystery novel about a librarian who solves crimes, lay open on the coffee table with a bookmark still marking her place. Walking through those familiar rooms, I felt the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me like a physical thing. My kids were 1,000 miles away, probably being told terrible things about their father. My wife had become a stranger who seemed to hate me with an intensity I couldn't understand. My career was destroyed, my reputation in ruins, my bank account empty. But standing in my mother's living room, surrounded by her books and her photographs and the quiet dignity of the life she'd built for us, I made a decision. This house was the one thing Cordelia's lawyers couldn't take from me. It was mine now, free and clear. A gift from a woman who'd spent her entire adult life making sure I had something solid to stand on. I'd renovate it, sell it, and use every penny to fight for my children. It seemed like a good plan. I had no idea I was about to discover that my mother had left me something far more valuable than real estate. The divorce proceedings started 8 months after Cordelia first asked for some space to think. I should have seen it coming, but I was still believing we could work things out. Still thinking this was about our marriage and not something much darker. I'll never forget the morning the papers were served. I was getting ready for work, same routine I'd had for 15 years. Coffee, shower, kiss Cordelia goodbye even though she'd barely acknowledged me for months. The doorbell rang at 7:30, and there stood a process server with an envelope that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. The petition wasn't just asking for divorce, it was asking for everything. Full custody of Quinlan and Brenna, the house, my business assets, even my retirement accounts. But what made my blood run cold were the allegations. According to these documents, I was a compulsive gambler who'd been hiding massive debts from my family. They claimed I'd stolen money from client escrow accounts to feed my addiction. They painted me as financially reckless, emotionally unstable, and potentially dangerous to my own children. None of it was true. I'd maybe bought 5 lottery tickets in my entire life, never set foot in a casino, never even played poker with friends. I'd built my insurance practice on trust and reliability. Every client account was clean, every penny accounted for. But somehow, Cordelia's attorney had documentation for all of it. When I confronted her that evening, she was packing boxes in our bedroom with mechanical efficiency. "Cordelia, what the hell is this?" I held up the divorce papers, my hands shaking. "Gambling addiction, theft, you know none of this is true." She didn't even look up from folding her clothes. "I know what I know, Fletcher. The bank statements don't lie." "What bank statements? Show me these bank statements." That's when she finally turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something cold and calculating that made her look like a complete stranger. "You're not the man I married," she said quietly. "Maybe you never were." The next 6 weeks were a blur of legal meetings, document reviews, and watching my life get dissected by strangers. Cordelia's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Voss, presented evidence that should have been impossible to fake. Bank statements showing withdrawals I'd never made, casino receipts with my signature from places I'd never been, credit card charges for online gambling sites I'd never heard of. My own lawyer, a decent guy named Robert Chen, who I'd used for business contracts, kept shaking his head as we went through everything. "Fletcher, I've got to ask, is any of this real? Because if you've been hiding gambling debts, I need to know now, so we can work on damage control." "Rob, I swear on my children's lives, I have never gambled anything more than a church raffle ticket. Someone is setting me up, and I don't understand how or why." But the evidence kept coming. Witness statements from people claiming I'd borrowed money and never paid them back. A co-worker from my office swearing he'd seen me placing bets on my phone during lunch breaks. Even my neighbor, Jerry Holbrook, who I'd had beers with dozens of times, signed an affidavit saying he'd watched me become increasingly erratic and desperate over the past year. The worst part was watching my kids during all of this. Quinlan started avoiding me, spending more time at friends' houses, giving me one-word answers when I tried to talk to him about basketball or school. Brenna would still hug me goodnight, but I could see the confusion in her eyes, the way she was trying to reconcile the father she knew with the man everyone was saying I was. The custody evaluation was humiliating. A court-appointed psychologist named Dr. Martinez spent 3 hours asking me questions about my mental health, my relationship with my children, my financial habits. She was professional but distant, and I could tell she'd already read all of Cordelia's accusations before I walked into her office. Mr. Morrison, addiction often involves denial. Many gambling addicts become very skilled at hiding their behavior from family members. Doctor, I understand that, but I'm not in denial because I'm not an addict. I'm telling you the truth. She made notes and said she'd include my statements in her report. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. I drove to the courthouse that morning knowing I was probably going to lose my children, but still hoping that somehow the truth would come out, that someone would see through whatever game was being played. The courtroom was sterile and cold, nothing like the dramatic legal scenes you see in movies. Judge Patricia Winters was a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen every kind of family destruction imaginable and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. Cordelia's lawyer presented her case with surgical precision. Bank records, witness statements, expert testimony about gambling addiction and its impact on families. She painted a picture of a man who'd been living a double life, whose addiction had escalated to the point where he was stealing from clients and lying to everyone who trusted him. My lawyer did his best with what we had, which was basically my word against a mountain of documentation. He pointed out inconsistencies in some of the witness statements, questioned the timing of certain financial transactions, argued that the evidence was circumstantial. It wasn't enough. Judge Winters awarded Cordelia primary custody, the house, and most of our assets. I was granted supervised visitation every other weekend, pending completion of a gambling addiction treatment program and financial counseling. As we walked out of the courthouse, Cordelia caught up to me in the parking lot. She was smiling, actually smiling, as she delivered the final blow. "You'll never see Quinlan and Brenna again. I'm moving them to Portland next month, and you don't have the money to fight me anymore." That night, I sat in my empty apartment and tried to figure out how my life had become unrecognizable in less than a year. Living in my mother's house was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as she'd left it when she died 2 years ago. Her coffee mug still sat in the dish drainer by the kitchen sink. Her reading glasses lay folded on the end table next to her favorite armchair. Even her slippers were still positioned neatly beside her bed, as if she'd just stepped out for a moment and would be back any minute. The first few weeks, I barely left the living room couch. I'd wake up every morning thinking maybe this was all some terrible nightmare, that I'd open my eyes and be back in my California bedroom with Cordelia sleeping beside me and the sound of the kids getting ready for school down the hall. But every morning I'd see the water stain on Mom's ceiling and remember that my old life was gone, probably forever. Depression hit me like a physical weight. Some days I couldn't even manage to shower or make coffee. I'd just lie there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Quinlan and Brenna, wondering what Cordelia was telling them about why Daddy wasn't around anymore. Were they worried about me? Did they think I'd abandoned them? Did they believe the lies about gambling and stealing? But after about a month of feeling sorry for myself, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was my mother's voice in my head, the way she used to tell me that problems don't solve themselves by wishing they'd go away. Maybe it was just basic survival instinct. Whatever it was, I realized that if I was going to have any chance of getting my children back, I needed money, and the only asset I had left was this house. The place needed work. Mom had done her best to maintain it over the years, but she was in her 70s when she died, and some things had been sliding. The kitchen cabinets needed refinishing, the bathroom needed updating, and the whole place could use fresh paint throughout. If I was going to sell it for enough money to fund a legal battle, I had to make it shine. I threw myself into the renovation work with desperate energy. I stripped wallpaper, sanded floors, painted every room. Working with my hands felt good after months of sitting in lawyers' offices feeling helpless. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, was a small act of fighting back against the people who'd tried to destroy me. The basement was the last area I tackled. Mom had used it mainly for storage, and it was packed with decades of accumulated stuff. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old photo albums, my school projects from elementary school that she'd saved for some reason. Going through her things was emotional, but also oddly comforting. It reminded me of who I really was, where I'd come from, the woman who'd raised me to be honest and hardworking and decent. That's when I noticed something strange about the furnace area. The basement had a corner where the old oil furnace sat, converted to gas sometime in the 1990s but never moved from its original position. But the concrete floor around it looked different than the rest of the basement. There were scratch marks that looked recent, and when I knelt down to examine them more closely, I could see that dust had settled in patterns that didn't quite make sense. It looked like the furnace had been moved, and recently. That was impossible. Mom had been dead for 2 years, and before that, she'd been too frail to move anything heavier than a book. The furnace had to weigh several hundred pounds. There was no way she could have moved it by herself, and I couldn't think of any reason why she would have wanted to. But the evidence was right there in front of me. The scratches in the concrete, the dust patterns, even some scuff marks on the furnace itself that looked fresh. I spent the better part of an afternoon figuring out how to move that thing. I had to disconnect the gas line, which scared the hell out of me, and use a furniture dolly and a lot of leverage to shift it about 3 feet from the wall. My back was screaming by the time I managed it, but it was worth it. Behind the furnace, set into the concrete wall at about shoulder height, was a small safe I'd never known existed. It was one of those old-fashioned combination safes, maybe 18 inches square, painted the same gray as the basement wall so it would blend in. The metal was worn smooth in places, like it had been opened many times over many years. There was no brand name visible, nothing to indicate how old it was or where it had come from. I stared at that safe for probably 20 minutes, my mind racing. How long had it been there? Why had my mother never mentioned it? What was inside it that was important enough to hide behind a furnace? The combination lock had numbers from 0 to 99. That meant 10,000 possible combinations, which could take forever to crack. But as I stood there looking at it, something my mother used to do came back to me. Every year, on my birthday, March 15th, she'd call me at exactly 7:23 in the morning. Not 7:30, not 7:15, but 7:23 on the dot. She'd always said it was because that was the exact time I was born, and she wanted to celebrate the precise moment I came into the world. March 15th, 1977, 03:15:77. My hands were shaking as I turned the dial, right to 03, left to 15, right to 77. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard a soft click, and the heavy door swung open. What I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my life. The safe was deeper than it looked from the outside, and it was packed full. The first thing I saw was money. More cash than I'd ever seen in one place. Stacks of $100 bills bound with rubber bands, some of them old and yellowed, others crisp and new. My hands trembled as I pulled them out, counting as I went. $847,000 to be exact. Beneath the money were documents, multiple driver's licenses, all with my mother's photograph but different names. Isabella Reyes from New Mexico, Maria Santos from Arizona, Catherine Walsh from Nevada. The photos showed my mother at different ages, but it was definitely her. Younger versions of the quiet librarian who'd raised me, but with something harder in her eyes, something watchful that I'd never noticed when she was alive. There were Social Security cards to match the licenses, birth certificates, even a passport for Isabella Reyes dated 1988. All of them looked completely authentic, not like forgeries but like official government documents. My mother, Winifred Morrison, had apparently been living under multiple identities for decades. At the very bottom of the safe was a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my mother's careful handwriting. My real name, not some alias, just Fletcher in the script I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists my entire life. I sat down hard on the basement floor and tore open the envelope. Inside were 3 pages of my mother's handwriting, and the first line made my blood freeze in my veins. My dearest Fletcher, if you're reading this, they finally found you, and I'm no longer here to protect you. The letter went on to destroy everything I'd believed about my life. Your real name is Fletcher Castellano. Your father didn't die in a car accident when you were 12. His name was Vincent Castellano, and he was murdered by the Torino crime family in Chicago on September 18, 1989. I witnessed his murder because I was supposed to die with him. Instead, I ran. I took you and I ran, and 3 months later, I testified against the men who killed your father in front of a federal grand jury. I had to stop reading for a moment. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. Vincent Castellano. Not Vincent Morrison, construction worker who died in a traffic accident, but Vincent Castellano, who was murdered by the mob. And my mother hadn't just been a widow trying to make ends meet. She'd been a witness in a federal case. The letter continued. We entered the Witness Protection Program in January 1990. I became Winifred Morrison. You became Fletcher Morrison, and we moved to Akron, Ohio to start over. The government gave us new identities, a modest settlement to help us establish our new lives, and the promise that we'd be safe as long as we never contacted anyone from our old life or revealed who we really were. Everything started making sense. The way my mother always seemed to have just enough money despite her librarian's salary, her reluctance to talk about our life before Ohio, the way she'd taught me never to trust strangers too quickly, never to reveal too much personal information, always to be aware of my surroundings. I'd thought she was just being protective. She'd been keeping us alive. The money in this safe is what remains of our government settlement, plus money I saved over the years by living carefully. But Fletcher, there's something else you need to know, something I discovered too late to warn you properly. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I hired private investigators to watch you in California starting 3 years ago, not because I didn't trust you, but because I'd heard rumors that people were asking questions about the Castellano family again. What they discovered broke my heart. Your wife Cordelia has been working with people who've been looking for us for decades. They found you first, and they used her to get close to you. The room started spinning around me. Cordelia, my high school sweetheart, the mother of my children, the woman I'd loved for 20 years, had been working with the people who killed my father. I don't know if she understood what she was really involved in, or if they manipulated her the same way they tried to manipulate you. But the divorce proceedings, the false evidence about gambling, all of it was designed to break you financially and emotionally, so you'd have nowhere to go except back to Ohio. They wanted to force you to come here, to the one place where they knew I might have left something that could lead them to other witnesses or evidence from the original case. I felt like I was going to throw up. Every terrible thing that had happened to me over the past year, losing my house, my kids, my reputation, all of it had been orchestrated by people who'd been hunting my family for over 30 years. But my mother hadn't just left me money and the truth. She'd left me a way to fight back. There's a phone number at the bottom of this letter. Call Marshal Theodore Vance with the U.S. Marshals Service. He's been waiting for this call since the day I died. Tell him you're Vincent Castellano's son, and tell him you're ready to finish what we started." The number was written in red ink, underlined 3 times. Below it, my mother had written one final message. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. I wanted to give you a normal life, a chance to be happy without looking over your shoulder every day. But I always knew this day might come. You are stronger than you know, Fletcher. You come from a long line of people who don't back down from fights, even when the odds are against them. Your father would be proud of the man you've become. I know I am. Use the money wisely, get your children back, and remember that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you need to be." I sat on that basement floor for an hour, just staring at the letter and trying to process what it meant. My entire life had been a lie, but not the kind of lie that diminishes you. The kind of lie that protects you until you're strong enough to handle the truth. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed Marshal Theodore Vance. Marshal Theodore Vance answered on the second ring, like he'd been sitting by his phone waiting for 35 years. "Vance." "Marshal Vance, this is Fletcher Morrison, but I think my real name is Fletcher Castellano." There was a long pause, then a deep breath. "Son, I've been waiting for this call since your mother died. Where are you right now?" "I'm in my mother's house in Akron, sitting next to an open safe that she left for me. Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone. And don't leave that house. I'll be there in 4 hours." Marshal Vance turned out to be a tall, gray-haired man in his early 60s who looked like he'd seen every kind of human evil imaginable and had never quite gotten used to it. He arrived with 2 other federal agents and spent 6 hours going through everything my mother had left behind, photographing documents, cataloging evidence, and asking me questions about my life in California. "Your mother was one of the bravest people I ever worked with," he told me as we sat at her kitchen table around midnight. She knew they'd eventually track down her son, so she prepared for this day. The money, the safe combination using your birthday, even hiring those private investigators to watch you in California. She wanted you to find all of this when you needed it most. The full scope of what had happened to me was even worse than I'd imagined. The Torino crime family had been systematically hunting down witnesses from my father's murder trial for decades, but they'd gotten smarter about it. Instead of just killing people, which brought too much federal attention, they'd learned to destroy lives more subtly. They'd find ways to compromise the people closest to their targets, then use those people to create chaos and financial ruin. "They've been working on your case for at least 5 years, Marshal Vance explained. They found Cordelia through her real estate connections. People who knew the right kind of criminals. They probably approached her as potential clients first, legitimate business that slowly turned into something else. The investigators my mother had hired had been building their own case during this time, documenting everything. They had recordings of Cordelia meeting with people connected to the Torino organization. They had evidence of money changing hands, falsified documents being created, witnesses being paid to lie about me. The gambling addiction story, the fake bank statements, all of it was their work," Marshal Vance said. "They've used the same playbook on 6 other witnesses over the past 15 years. Create financial and legal chaos, destroy the person's credibility, then wait for them to run back to wherever they came from. But there was something the Torino family hadn't counted on. My mother's death from natural causes 2 years earlier had triggered certain protocols within the Marshal's service. They'd been quietly monitoring the situation, waiting to see if anyone would come looking for the safe house in Ohio. We've had surveillance on this neighborhood for 2 years, Marshal Vance admitted. We knew if they forced you to come back here, they'd eventually make their move. We've been documenting everyone who's shown unusual interest in this address." The most shocking revelation came the next morning. Cordelia had been arrested at her Portland hotel at 6 a.m., along with 3 men who'd been following her. She'd been cooperating with people she thought were private investigators helping her secure a better divorce settlement. She had no idea they were connected to organized crime until federal agents explained it to her in an interview room. She's agreed to testify, Marshal Vance told me over coffee. Turns out she's as much a victim in this as you are. They convinced her you were hiding gambling debts and other women. They showed her fake evidence, got her scared and angry, then offered to help her protect the kids and secure her financial future. The hardest phone call I ever made was to Quinlan and Brenna. They were staying with Cordelia's sister in Portland, confused and scared because their mother had been arrested and no one would tell them why. "Dad?" Quinlan's voice sounded small and young. Nothing like the confident teenager I remembered. "Hey, buddy. I know this is all really confusing right now, but I need you to know that everything's going to be okay. Your mom and I both love you very much, and none of what's happened is anybody's fault." "Are you really a gambling addict?" Brenna asked when she got on the phone. "Mom said you stole money and that's why we had to move." "No, sweetheart, I never gambled, and I never stole anything. Some very bad people lied about me to hurt our family, but the police caught them. We're going to be together again, very soon." It took 6 months to untangle everything legally. The evidence my mother's investigators had gathered, combined with Cordelia's testimony and the federal case against the Torino organization, was enough to clear my name completely. The fake gambling records were exposed as forgeries. The witnesses who'd lied about me recanted their statements. My insurance license was reinstated with an official apology from the state board. Cordelia and I will never get back what we had. Too much damage was done, too many lies were told, too much trust was broken. But we're working together now to help our kids understand what happened and why. She's in therapy dealing with the guilt of having been manipulated into destroying her own family. I'm in therapy learning how to trust people again. But we got our children back, and that's what matters most. The house in Ohio sold for enough money to buy a smaller place in California and fund college accounts for both kids. Quinlan's back on the basketball team, and his coach says several colleges are still interested despite the disruption to his junior year. Brenna's art has gotten more hopeful lately, more colorful, though she still draws a lot of pictures of families that look like they've survived storms. I think about my mother every day, about the sacrifice she made to give me a normal childhood, about the courage it took to testify against murderers and then spend 35 years looking over her shoulder. She saved my life twice, once when I was 12 and again when I was 47, and I never got the chance to thank her for either one. The Torino case is going to trial next year, and I'll be testifying just like my mother did all those years ago. This time, though, I won't be running afterward. This time, we're going to finish what she started. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you need to be. My mother knew that, and she made sure that even from beyond the grave, she could still protect her son. If this story touched you in any way, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time someone in your family protected you in ways you didn't understand until later. And if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Thanks for listening. And remember that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones fighting battles we never see.